Welcome. My name's Liam Gatroy. I'm the Executive Director of NIF Australia. I want to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and paying my respects to their elders past and present. We're very proud tonight to have put together this evening in honour of the late Amos Oz. Israelis and supporters of Israel around the world looked to Amos Oz for guidance and leadership. When peace seemed attainable within our grasp, we looked to Amos to show us the way. When a two-state solution seemed so far away, as indeed it has for a number of years now, we turned to Amos to offer us hope, to tell us there was a solution, that we must never give up. There are almost 200 people here in Bondi, about 100 watching live in Melbourne, and even more watching on YouTube from the comfort of their own homes, probably cooler than it is here. But before we get started, I hand over to the wonderful Michaela Kalowski, who's hosting and guiding us through tonight's exploration of Oz's political and literary legacy. I wanted to take a few minutes to note the recent passing of our Vice President, of NIF Australia's Vice President, a driving force behind what we did, Stephen Glass. Stephen suddenly died over a month ago. His loss has left a massive hole in our hearts. Ilana Snyder, who's our board chair who lives in Melbourne, asked me to read this short message on her behalf. She said, "Stephen's sudden death has left us all at NIF shattered. He was instrumental in the establishment of NIF in Australia and a great supporter ever since. As Daniel Sokach, the CEO of NIF in the United States, said at our global board meeting in Jerusalem last week, Stephen's death represents a great loss to the entire New Israel Fund community. Stephen and I had a true partnership," she writes. "We talked often and made decisions together. His black humour and wit were a gift. I trusted his judgment on all matters. Stephen would have loved to have been at this event to celebrate the contribution of Amos Oz. It's just so sad that he's not. Our thoughts are with his wife Michelle and children, Samantha and Jason, and we wish them a long life." Just 9 months ago, Amos Oz and Stephen had a wonderful crossover moment in their mutual passion for Israel's democracy, for speaking out against injustice and for speaking truth to power. Amos wrote an opinion piece for NIF Australia, which was published in the Jewish News. He compared Breaking the Silence, a brave group of former IDF soldiers who share experiences of their service in the occupied Palestinian territories as part of a call to end the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. He compared them to some of the great leaders of Jewish history who stood up for what was right, even when it was unpopular. He compared the ex-soldiers of Breaking the Silence to the prophet Jeremiah, who pointed out the Jewish people's sins, to Ben-Gurion, who through gritted teeth agreed to give up part of the historic land of Israel, to Rabin and Perez, who tried to bring about a historic compromise, and to Menachem Begin, who returned Sinai in exchange for peace. Oz said that by speaking truth to power, Jeremiah was ostracised by his contemporaries. Ben-Gurion was called a traitor. Rabin and Perez were depicted as Nazis, and Begin was accused by members of his own movement for betraying his party's ideals and the ideals of Zionism itself. For Amos Oz, silence breaking is one of the great Jewish traditions. Although silence breakers are branded traitors by their contemporaries, he wrote that often we look back at them with great pride. He wrote that moral strength is not a luxury nor a mere decoration. Moral strength is a necessity for the survival of a nation, society, and the individual. According to Oz, moral strength is not a commodity manufactured for export, kept in a drawer, at least until the war is over, until normal times are upon us, and the country shall know peace for 40 years. And only then may we whip out our glimmering moral greatness, just like new, bearing it on our breasts and revealing how wonderful we are to the world. No, Oz wrote, moral urgency, especially in times of war, is like first aid in a battlefield. This was what Stephen drilled into us over and over again, that Breaking the Silence, and indeed all human rights organisations committed to equality, inclusion and justice, are the bedrock of any democratic society. They are the organisations that make us proud. Oz believed that it wasn't the ones who exposed moral distortions that reflected badly on Israel, but those committing them. That was Stephen to a T. Stephen's legacy for NIF Australia, as well as his work assisting people seeking asylum and refugees as a legal advocate and in the public square, remain with us as we speak our truth. To keep fighting for an Israel that is more just and more inclusive, even in the face of those who, as Amos Oz wrote, hurl stones at us. Both Stephen Glass and Amos Oz knew that these are the values which make Israel a strong society. We'll miss Stephen greatly. I'll pass you on now to Michaela to begin our event.
Thank you, Liam. It is my great pleasure to be here tonight to host this wonderful tribute to Amos Oz. As Liam said, we have an audience in Melbourne. Welcome to you as well. We're very glad to be celebrating Amos's life and writing with you as well. While many of you may know quite a lot about Amos Oz, I thought it might be fitting still to give a little bit of his very long biography before we get going. He was born Amos Klausner in Jerusalem in 1939. His parents arrived in Palestine in the mid-1930s from Eastern Europe. Some among his family were actually militant right-wing Zionists. The household he grew up in was apparently bursting with failed literary and intellectual ambitions, chiefly those of his father. His mother's depression and her suicide when he was only 12 years old shaped him. He changed his name around this time from Klausner to Oz, the Hebrew word for strength. In 1954, aged 15, he defied and rebelled against his father's world and left Jerusalem to live and work in kibbutz Hulda, where he also completed his secondary education. After military service, he also completed his BA and returned to the kibbutz, where he would live, work, write and farm for 25 years. He said he didn't want to be known as a fiction writer. He felt that fiction could lie. And his public image was not just that of a great Hebrew writer, but that of an author politician. He's acknowledged that he was part of a Judeo-Slavonic tradition, where writers are also expected to be prophets for their people. He longed for a two-state solution. It will come. Everyone knows it will come, he said in a 2004 interview. The question is when. He was heavily involved in the peace movement, and he's said that prime ministers over many years telephoned him in the middle of the night to ask for his political advice. But as he pointed out, of course, they never took it. Amos Oz devoted his time to writing and teaching. At the end of his life, he was a full professor at the Ben Gurion University of the Negev in Beersheba, and was known as a champion of modern Hebrew. A prolific writer, he authored 35 books, among them short story collections, novellas and children's books, as well as 9 books of articles and essays. He actively campaigned for the Israeli peace movement right up until his death. He leaves behind Nili, whom he married in 1960, a son, Daniel, and 2 daughters, Fania and Galia. I was very fortunate to interview Amos Oz in 2011 when he came to Sydney for the Shalom Institute. And he was in person as he was on the page, which is quite rare for an author. It's not always the case. He was direct, charming, hyper-articulate, frank, funny and powerful. Every word he wrote, every word he spoke, forced you to think more deeply, to reconsider your position and to allow yourself to feel more compassion than you thought might be possible. Tonight, NIF have brought together wonderful speakers who will share some of his writing and writing about him, their own reflections on how his words and ideas affected them, and we have some musical treats for you as well. First, I want to start with a video from Noah, who is an iconic Israeli singer who's been performing worldwide for 30 years. She's an active advocate promoting peace and dialogue between Israelis and Palestinians, and she recorded this video especially for NIF.
Hello to all my friends in NIF Australia. I'm recording this little video in memory of Amos Oz, who is my good friend. And see that white chair in the back? I'm imagining him there. He used to sit in his living room and listen to Gail, Dor, and me sing for him. He didn't go out very often to concerts, so we would come over to his house. Normally it was on Friday morning, and sing to him, and we would have long conversations about all kinds of interesting things. And he would share with us his incredible wisdom and creativity and personality, which was just magnificent and magnetic. What a great writer, what a great man. It was a great honor for us to have known him and befriended him, to have him take us into his big heart. And suddenly he's gone. It's actually quite difficult to comprehend. May you rest in peace, Amos. You will be so deeply missed by all of us.
Now I'd like to introduce Seri Feldman-Gabai, former Federal Rosh Chinuch and Head of Education for Habanim Dror Australia, with a reading from one of Oz's works, The King of Norway.
In the afternoon, when all the kibbutz members sat on their porches and drank coffee or played with their children on the small lawns in front of their houses, Tzvi Provizor would go to the clubhouse to read newspapers in the company of 5 or 6 solitary men like him, ardent readers and debaters, aging bachelors, widowers or divorcees. From his corner, Ruvka Roth, a small bald man with large bat-like ears, would mumble that retaliatory raids only accelerated the circle of violence because revenge begets revenge and retaliation begets retaliation. The others would immediately attack him. "What are you talking about? We can't let them get away with it. Restraint and appeasement only make the Arabs more brazen." Tzvi Provizor would blink and say, "In the end, it'll turn into a war. It can only cause a terrible war." And Emmanuel Glosman, the stutterer, would say excitedly, "War, very good. We will win and take their Lela land, all the way to the Jordan." Ruvka Roth would think out loud, "Ben-Gurion is a great chess player. He always sees 5 moves ahead, except that everything with him is always by force." On that subject, Tzvi Provizor would prophesy sadly, "If we lose, the Arabs will come and wipe us out. If we win, the Russians will come and blow us up." Emmanuel Glosman would plead, "Enough of our friends, quiet. Let me read the papers in peace." And Tzvi, after a few moments' silence, would say, "Did you hear? It says here that the King of Norway has liver cancer, and the head of our regional council has cancer too." Whenever Ronnie Shinlin, the comedian, saw Tzvi at the shoemaker's or by the clothing storeroom, he would ask him mockingly, "So, angel of death, what airplane crashed today?" Tzvi Provizor and Luna Blank fell into a routine. They spoke every evening. He would sit on the right-hand edge of the left bench at the foot of the lawn, and she would sit near him on the left-hand edge of the right bench. He would blink as he spoke to her, and she, wearing a pretty sleeveless sundress, would crumple her handkerchief between her fingers. Praising the kibbutz gardens, the fruits of his labor, she said that thanks to him they lived in a green meadow, in the shade of blossoming orchards, among blooming flower beds. She had a proclivity for using fancy words. She was a 3rd-grade teacher and made excellent, delicate pencil drawings that hung on the walls of several of our small apartments. Her face was round and smiling, and her eyelashes long, though her neck was a bit wrinkled and she had very thin legs and almost no breasts. Her husband had been killed several years earlier while doing reserve duty on the Gaza border, and they'd had no children. The kibbutz members considered her an admirable figure, a woman who'd overcome tragedy and poured her entire soul into teaching. Tzvi talked to her about the different species of roses, and she nodded eagerly, as if agreeing with every word. Then he gave her a detailed description of the horrors of the locust epidemic that was devastating Sudan. Luna said, "You are a very sensitive person." Tzvi blinked and said, "Sudan doesn't have much greenery as it is." Luna said, "Why do you take all the sorrow of the world on your shoulders?" And Tzvi replied, "Closing your eyes to the cruelty of life is, in my opinion, both stupid and sinful. There's very little we can do about it, so we have to at least acknowledge it."
A great final line from Amos, very Amos. Next, I'd like to introduce Justine Seidman. She's the director of the Shalom Sydney Jewish Writers Festival and PJ Library. She's reading Amos Oz's introduction to a new edition of his very famous 1968 novel, My Michael. This novel is about a disintegrating marriage in Jerusalem in the 1950s, for those who haven't read it. The story is told through the voice of Hannah Gonen, and it received rave reviews, as did this new edition. And over time, Hannah's frustration with her own domestic life leads to her kind of dipping in and out of reality. Justine.
40 years later. My novel, My Michael, is written entirely from the point of view of a woman in the first person. I was about 26 years old when I wrote it, and I was certain that I knew everything there was to know about women. Today, I would not dare write an entire novel in a female voice. Following its publication, I received many letters from astonished women who asked me, "How did you know?" I also received many other letters from women who chided me for not knowing anything. I'll never know who was right. The truth is that I wrote my Michael under duress. The character of Hannah so overwhelmed me that I began speaking her idiom and dreaming her dreams at night. And it's not that I copied her from a real person, not at all. She came from wherever she came from, got inside me and did not let me go. I withstood her for many months and did not write a single line. Who am I to write about love, marriage and disillusionment of a young woman from Jerusalem who was 10 years my senior? But Hannah would not let me go. She brought with her into my life her Michael, her parents and his parents, her son and her neighbours, the whole neighbourhood, her entire Jerusalem, and also the Arab twins of her dreams that turned into my dreams. I was compelled to begin to write the book in order to get rid of her and get back to my life. My life was that of a kibbutznik at Huldah, who divided his time between teaching and fielding crops, very far from Hannah Gonen, from her failing love, and from her dismal Jerusalem. I didn't think I would finish writing this book. I thought I would write a few pages about Hannah, maybe a short story, and so break free of her. I wasn't keen on her or her marital woes, and her secret fantasy life was really not particularly to my liking. I began to write the book in 1965, prior to the publication of my first novel, Elsewhere Perhaps. At first, I wrote only on Thursdays. That year, the kibbutz assigned me one workday a week for my literary experiments. But Hannah quickly forced me to write her story every day of the week. Nili and I and our 2 daughters then lived in quarters that consisted of one small room and another room half the size next to the kibbutz offices, opposite the bus stop. I would come home in the afternoon, take a shower, and devote the evening to my family. When the girls and Nili went to sleep, I'd sit down and write for 2 or 3 hours into the night. Since I had no study, since I was unable to write a single line without a lit cigarette between my fingers, and since Nili could not sleep in a smoky room with a light on, I shut myself up in the tiny bathroom, which was about the size of an aeroplane lavatory. I'd put down the toilet seat, sit on it, and place on my knees a volume of Van Gogh reproductions that we'd received as a wedding present. I'd open my notebook on top of the art book, light a cigarette, and write what Hannah dictated to me until midnight or 1 a.m, when my eyes closed with weariness and sorrow. When I hear about writers who travel to seek inspiration in ambience-laden places with breathtaking landscapes, I recall how I wrote my Michael in the toilet. Perhaps it's reflected in the book, most of which in fact takes place in a tiny, cramped, murky Jerusalem apartment with a low ceiling. I just said that I wrote everything that Hannah dictated to me, but that is not entirely accurate. The truth is that I fought with her with all my might. More than once, even more than twice, I heard myself telling her, "That doesn't fit. It's not your nature. I'm not going to write that." And she would scold me. "Don't you tell me what's in my nature and what isn't. Just shut up and write." I'd insist, "I won't write that for you. It just doesn't fit. I'm very sorry. Go to someone else. Go to a woman. I can't write such a thing. I'm not a woman. I'm not a woman author." She remained adamant. "Write what I tell you and don't interfere." "But I'm not your secretary," I would say. "You're just a character in my book, not the opposite." We'd fight it out at night, she and I. Sometimes I let her have her way, and sometimes I absolutely refused to give in. To this day, I don't know if the book would have come out better or worse if I had given in to Hannah more or less than I did. When I finished writing the book in April 1967, a month before the Six-Day War broke out, when I finally freed myself from slavery to Hannah, I sat down and read it and was overcome with heavy doubts. I'd produced a novel where no one got killed, no one was betrayed, a predictable chronicle of a marriage gone sour, of a somewhat hysterical wife, a desolate husband, a nerdy kid, grubby neighbours, and a divided Jerusalem that came out wintry, gloomy and ominous. Furthermore, 6 weeks later, they were blowing the shofar at the Western Wall, and the air was full of Jerusalem of gold, which was the opposite of the Jerusalem of Hannah and Michael. Had I not finished writing the book a month before the war, I surely would never have finished it. I thought to myself, this is a book that will really only appeal to a small clutch of sensitive readers willing to make do with a novel that really has no plot, whose heroes are really not heroes, and which takes place in a city, divided Jerusalem, that no longer exists. With a very heavy heart, I delivered the manuscript to an editor at the Oved publishing house. He read it and told me that regretfully the book was not marketable and would not appeal to the readers of his popular People's Library imprint. In fact, he said it reminded him kind of like a book of poetry, written with sensitivity but really not appropriate for the public at large. He offered some ideas for improving the book. For example, he suggested Hannah should cheat on Michael at least once, or alternatively, Michael could turn out to be a scientific genius and win international fame, or they could both leave Jerusalem and open a new chapter of their lives elsewhere, perhaps at a kibbutz. And maybe it would be best to actually change the title of the book from My Michael to The Hannah Diaries. And why such an old-fashioned name? Maybe I should call her Noah or Ruti. But even if I were refused to make such changes in the book, the editor said, Oved would deign to publish the novel as it was. He just wanted to give me some food for thought and to suggest how I might put a little life into my drab little story. For my part, I was elated by the words written with sensitivity, and I agreed with him about the public at large. The publisher intended to issue a very small printing, but because of a mishap with another title, My Michael ended up coming out in April 1968, almost a year after I submitted it as part of the People's Library. To the publisher's surprise, to my own surprise, and to the surprise of the handful of close friends who had read the manuscript, My Michael turned into a bestseller overnight. Read by women and men. Nearly 130,000 copies were sold in Israel, and hundreds of thousands of other copies were bought by readers of the 28 languages into which it was translated in the 72 editions that were issued throughout the world. Maybe it really is true that some books are universal precisely because they are so provincial, and spacious precisely because they are minimalist, maybe. Sometimes I go back and I think about Hannah Gonen and her husband Michael in their gloomy apartment, about their dreary, uneventful lives. And I remember Hannah's voice recounting to me in the toilet in Kibbutz Hulda the misery of her entrapment, her unslaked longing for far lands, bustling cities, vast panoramas. I see Hannah standing by the window, always looking out over expanses she could not reach. And I tell her, to myself, Hannah, now you are everywhere. In Japan and Korea and China, in Bulgaria and Finland and Brazil. Are things just a bit better? Have a peaceful journey, I tell her. And then I return to what I am writing now, so far and not so far from her.
Thank you, Justine, for those fantastic insights. We rarely get to hear about Amos Oz's sort of literary life. We think of him so much as a political figure as well, so it's wonderful to hear that even Amos Oz gets knocked back. I next want to introduce the wonderful Hilton Immerman, OAM. Hilton was the CEO of the Shalom Institute and Shalom College. He's been awarded the Ron Kasten Humanitarian Award, amongst other recognition of his work and contributions. And he will share some of his reflections on meeting Amos Oz in Australia and on Amos's writing as well.
Thanks, Michaela, and Justine, what a wonderful reading that was. So as a former teacher of literature and a lover of Israel, I've been a huge fan of Amos Oz for many years. In 2005, I had the pleasure of bringing his daughter and son-in-law, Professors Fania and Oz-Salzberger, to Australia for 4 weeks. They came to give courses as part of Shalom's Scholars and Residence program. I must confess that I took advantage of my friendship with Fania to enlist her support in persuading her legendary dad to come to Sydney. It took a few years, but Amos and his family all came in 2011. The main purpose of his visit was to deliver Shalom's graph oration, which he entitled How to Cure a Fanatic. I feel greatly privileged to have been able to spend a fair part of a memorable week with Amos. He was a remarkable human being, a true scholar and a mensch. Hard to speak about him in the past tense. He had an awesome intellect, as we all know, was one of the world's great literary artists. He challenged conventional thinking in many ways. One example that I love emerges from his great novel, Judas, published quite recently in 2014. Medieval Christianity, he says, saw Judas as the archetypal evil Jew who betrayed Jesus. Judas was then used by the church to justify its murderous anti-Semitism. The novel turns this on its head. So just follow the logic carefully here. The book suggests that if Jesus was truly God's son, come to earth to redeem humankind, then Judas's betrayal had to be part of the divine plan. Judas was therefore not an agent of the devil, but of God. Even though I'm also a Bob Dylan fan, Amos Oz was so much more deserving of a Nobel Prize for Literature than Dylan. Sadly, they don't award them posthumously. So Amos, as you've gathered, bequeathed to us a diverse and massive body of work. He was the author of, Michaela said 35, depending on how the editions go, between 35 and 40 books, including novels, short stories, children's books and essays. He's been published in 45 languages, which is more than any other Israeli writer. A Tale of Love and Darkness is his magnum opus. I've heard many discerning people refer to it as the greatest book they've ever read. When he was in Sydney, I served as his chaperone and we had many conversations. Amos told me that to discourage him from ever leaving Israel, his parents did not want him to learn any languages other than Hebrew. Yet his English was superb, even conversationally. It was poetic and eloquent. I was awestruck by his expression, his diction, his imagery. He obviously has an incredible ability to tell a story or relate a quip. And much of this was done with self-effacing and an ironic sense of humour. One such example is an important lesson he attributes to his wise grandmother. He explains that she once asked him, "What is the difference between Jews and Christians?" The Christians believe, she said, that the Messiah has been here once and will come again one day. We Jews believe that the Messiah is still to come. Over this difference, his grandmother continued, you cannot imagine the hatred, bloodshed and persecution. Why can't everyone simply wait and see? If the Messiah comes and says, "Hello, it's nice to see you again," the Jews will have to apologize to the Christians. If, on the other hand, he comes and says, "Hi, it's good to meet you," the entire Christian world will have to apologize to the Jews. Until then, said my grandmother, live and let live. Another example comes from A Tale of Love and Darkness. In it, he says, out there in the world, the walls in Europe were covered in graffiti which said, "Yids, go back to Palestine." So we came back to Palestine, and now the world at large shouts at us, "Yids, get out of Palestine." Oz insists that the book Tale of Love and Darkness is not a memoir or an autobiography. He describes it as a story in which he is not the protagonist, but his parents are. Great literature, as you heard about my Michael, often deals with the particular and the personal, and through this explores themes that are both universal and eternal. In some ways, the tale is a typical family story of poor immigrants who leave behind the old country, vowing to forget it and erase it from their memories, but they can't. His parents remain obsessed by their unrequited love for Europe, even though it hated them as Jews, expelled many and murdered most. Of course, the new land does not compare nor live up to the unreal expectations. Amos says that as a young man he was angry with his parents, with his mother, as you heard, for committing suicide when he was 12, and he felt deserting him and his father. And he was angry with his father for not being the kind of husband who could have prevented this. He left his father's home, Michaela said, at 15 to join Kibbutz Hulda and changed his name from Klausner to Oz, and by so doing he discarded that stereotype of the pale, weak ghetto Jew to become a strong, rugged, outdoor Israeli. He explains that he could only write the tale, the story, with empathy, humour and compassion when he reached the age of being old enough to being his parents' parent. He was of that age, or they could be the age of his kids. Only then did his anger give way to curiosity and sympathy. So lastly, before a reading, I'll move briefly to his talk at the Graf Oration for Shalom, which we had the wonderful Michaela as the moderator and interviewer. In this talk, he argued that the biggest problem facing the world in the 21st century is the clash between fanatics and the rest of us. But fanaticism exists all around us, he said, and to varying degrees, we all have some elements of it within us. We all know vegetarians who will eat us alive for consuming meat, or pacifist Israelis who would want to kill us for having a different idea on how to make peace with the Palestinians. The seed for fanaticism is an uncompromising self-righteousness. I'm sure he would have agreed that a disturbing example of Jewish fanaticism was evident at the Kotel in Jerusalem just 2 days ago on International Women's Day. Thousands of ultra-Orthodox youths violently disrupted a special prayer service held to mark the 30th anniversary of Women of the Wall. The fanatic, says Oz, simplifies reality and lives in a world of good guys and bad guys, of right and wrong, of black and white. In Israel, he said, it's often not a clash between right and wrong, but frequently between wrong and wrong. And the clash between Israelis and Palestinians is most often a clash between right and right. So later in tonight's program, an excerpt of his speech will be screened, so I won't elaborate other than to say that he extols the need for compromise, which he says is no longer fashionable. He quipped at his speech, saying, "Believe me, having been married to the same woman for over 50 years, I know something about compromise." I'm sure he would acknowledge that his lovely wife Nellie knew even more. Now, I've got 2 short readings, and this is about books and his love for books. And the first one goes as follows, both from A Tale of Love and Darkness. When I was little, my ambition was to grow up to be a book, not a writer. People can be killed like ants. Writers are not hard to kill either, but not books. However systematically you try to destroy them, there's always a chance that a copy will survive and continue to enjoy a shelf life in some corner of an out-of-the-way library somewhere in Reykjavik, Valladolid, or Vancouver. And the second reading continues with the notion, but he talks about the difference between books and people. He says, while it was true that books could change with the years just as much as people could, the difference was that whereas people would always drop you when they could no longer get any advantage or pleasure or interest, or at least a good feeling from you, a book would never abandon you. Naturally, you sometimes drop them, maybe for several years or even forever, but they, even if you betrayed them, would never turn their backs on you. They would go on waiting for you silently and humbly on their shelf. They would wait for 10 years. They wouldn't complain. One night, when you suddenly needed a book, even at 3 a.m, even if it was a book you had abandoned and erased from your heart for years and years, it would never disappoint you. It would come down from its shelf and keep you company in your moment of need. It would not try to get its own back or make excuses or ask itself if it was worth its while or if you deserved it or if you still suited each other. It would come at once as soon as you asked. A book would never let you down. Certainly, none of Amos's books would. He lives on through them. Thank you.
Thank you for those beautiful words, Hilton. I also remember in a New Yorker review, a New Yorker interview, with Amos Oz, that he spoke about that idea of he always wanted to grow up to be a book. And he said he grew up with a lot of Holocaust survivors in Israel, many of whom would say to him that, be careful growing up because they knew so many children who hadn't. And he was always struck by the idea that he might not grow up, but if he wrote a book, it would always be here. Now we have a wonderful musical treat and interlude for everyone. I wanted to introduce two multi-talented singer-songwriters. Nadav Khan is an Israeli-born APRA award-winning singer-songwriter who's released 10 albums to date. And Jessie Chapnik Khan is an Argentine-Australian singer-songwriter and actress and writer. She performs solo under the name Apollonia and has just published her first children's book called Lenny and the Ants. Please make them welcome. They'll be performing a song which is called She is the Sun.
Thank you to NIF for inviting us to join this wonderful night, this amazing tribute to an incredible man. This song that we're going to perform is much like Amos Oz drew on grief and pain, anger, and transmuted those feelings into new insight and new inspiration. This song is tapping into that experience and how we can turn it into something else.
Yeah, in Jewish mysticism, wisdom and understanding is personified or symbolized through the feminine aspect. So this is a prayer for wisdom, and feel free to join me in your hearts with this prayer.
The sun.
come to know radiance. She is the sun, and may we who are grief-stricken come alive and know the ultimate frame of mind. Frame of mind. She is the sun, and may we who are broken hearted see her light and come to know radiance. She is the sun, and may we who are grief-stricken come alive and know the ultimate frame of mind. Frame of mind, frame of mind. She is the sun, and may we who are broken hearted see her light. Come to know radiance. She is the sun, and may we who are grief-stricken come alive and know the ultimate frame of mind. She is the sun, and may we who are broken hearted see her light. Come to know radiance. She is the sun. 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 See her light. See her light. She is the sun. Yes, she is the sun. Oh, and may we who are broken hearted see her light. See her light. See her She is the sun, and may we who are grief-stricken become alive and know the ultimate frame of mind. She is the sun, and may we who are broken hearted see her light and come to know radiance.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that beautiful song. Next up, I'd like to introduce Shira. She is a volunteer refugee advocate and a writer. Her book is called Unlocking the Past, Stories from My Mother's Diary, and it was published last year. Amos Oz was a supporter of Shira's.
In mid-2016, I had just completed my first book. Writing it had been a labour of love. After all, the stories were based on my mother Naomi's diary about Israel in the 1950s, which we had only discovered after her death. But now a new challenge arose. How was I going to get it published? With a journalist's chutzpah, I decided to write to two of Israel's foremost writers to seek their advice, Edgar and Amos Oz. I was particularly grateful to Amos Oz, notably for two of his works, both of which have been spoken about tonight, A Tale of Love and Darkness and My Michael, which helped me to understand what it must have been like to live in Jerusalem as a divided city. I had met Amos Oz once before as a young university student. He had come to Canberra in 1982 as keynote speaker for what used to be known as Confest, a combined conference and festival run by the Australian Union of Jewish Students, which was being held that year at ANU. As you would know, however, a member of the public can't simply send an email to a renowned author. Obviously, you have to seek permission first. While Edgar Keret's representative told me he was too busy, Amos Oz's London-based agent wrote back with his private email address, saying I would be welcome to contact him. So I duly wrote, expressing my appreciation for what I had learned from his writings and requesting his guidance. I soon received a reply, Amos Oz suggesting that I submit the stories to one of the publishing houses in Israel, assuring me that all of them have English readers so I would get a fair hearing. It was the encouragement I needed. It took about a year of dogged effort, but I ultimately found a publisher in Jerusalem, and last year, as mentioned, my book was launched, first in English and then in Hebrew. We spent almost the entire year getting the Hebrew translation right, but I was so glad we made the effort. Last November, when it was finally ready, I was able to write to Amos Oz's London agent again. I received the following response. Dear Shira, if I may, thank you for your email. Amos Oz asks that a copy of the book is sent by post in Hebrew to the address below. A private address was then supplied in Ramat Aviv. The author is sadly not able to promise to undertake to read the book very soon, with his apologies, due to the volume of requests he receives, his own publishing deadlines, and because, as he wrote to me, he is nowadays, with his other obligations, a very slow reader. That said, he would be pleased to receive a copy of the book, with which we wish you every success, and we are grateful that you wish to send him a copy. Thank you very much for your kind help. My best, Charles Buchan, The Wiley Agency, UK. I wrote back to Charles, saying simply, please tell Amos Oz he is a true gentleman, and arranged for my publisher to send him a copy, thanking them both for their interest and support. As we now know, Amos Oz must have been very ill by then, and yet, as my personal experience testifies, he remained a true mensch in his dealings with others. This was brought home to me during his recent memorial service, which I was privileged to attend together with my husband Ilan at the Tzavta Theatre in Tel Aviv on December 31. That day we joined hundreds of Israelis of all ages and from all walks of life who queued for hours to be able to pay their respects. Fortunate enough to find seats at the very back of a second auditorium where we could follow the proceedings on a large screen, we heard speaker after speaker, irrespective of their political affiliation, honour Amos Oz, not only as a truly gifted writer and eloquent leader, but for who he was as a human being. As his daughter, Fania Oz-Salzberger said, Father said that all of ethics and the 10 Commandments can be condensed into one axiom, do not cause pain. That is all. And if that isn't possible, then try to cause as little pain as possible. He tried to not cause pain his whole life and at times did not succeed. But so many people spoke about how Father helped them, provided a patient listening ear and lent a hand. He charmed the darkness to produce love, and from amongst the love he lived his life, entangled with love of this land and country. May his memory be for a blessing.
Thank you for sharing that, Shira. And now we have an opportunity to actually hear Amos Oz in his own words. As Hilton mentioned earlier, in 2011, he was in Sydney to deliver the Graph Oration, among other things. This section that you're about to see is one small segment of the talk that night, which was entitled How to Cure a Fanatic. In this section, he discussed antidotes to fanaticism and the importance of compromise, and the clip is really a gem for anyone who's not actually heard him speak.
not only curiosity and humor and the ability to imagine the other are antidotes to fanaticism. Another powerful antidote is the ability to live in open-ended situations, to accept the fact that some conflicts are not resolvable, that some conflicts don't resolve, they dissolve into fatigue and exhaustion. And this will be my only touch on the Israeli-Palestinian, Israeli-Arab conflict. It's not going to be resolved through a magic formula after which the two parties will embrace one another like long-lost brothers in tears. Oh, brothers, will you ever forgive me? Please love me. Take the land. Who cares about the land? Give me your love. This is never going to happen. What is likely to happen, and what is perhaps beginning to happen in the Middle East, is a syndrome of fatigue and exhaustion, both among Israelis and Palestinians. And a syndrome of fatigue and exhaustion finally leads to a compromise. I know the word compromise is regarded as an ugly word, as a dirty word, especially to some young idealists. They think compromise is dishonest. They think compromise is lack of integrity. They think compromise is somehow sneaky. Not in my vocabulary. In my vocabulary, the word compromise is synonymous with the word life. And where there is life, there ought to be compromises. And the opposite of compromise is not integrity. And the opposite of compromise is not idealism. The opposite of compromise is fanaticism and death. I'm a great believer in compromise as opposed to capitulation. I'm not advocating turning the other cheek to an enemy. I'm advocating trying to meet the other somewhere halfway. And believe me, I know one or two things about compromises, having been married to the same woman for 51 years. So the Israelis and the Palestinians are tired, and it is a blessed fatigue. It's not that the eyes of the Palestinians are open to see the light of the Zionist truth, or the eyes of the Israelis open to see the light of the genuine claim of the Palestinians over the land. None of that. It's a clenched teeth acceptance that we are not alone in the land. We Israelis are not alone in the land. The Palestinians are not alone in the land. No one is going to go out. And this small country, smaller than Denmark, makes so much fuss about it. You would think it's bigger than China. But in fact, it's smaller than Denmark. This small country happens to be the only home of two nations. They cannot become one happy family because they are not one, and because they are not happy, and because they are not even family. They are two unhappy families. They have to divide the house into two smaller apartments. I think this is called in English a semi-detached home. This is likely to happen. The only ones who oppose it and object it and try to derail it are the fanatics on both sides. The advocates of Greater Palestine and the advocates of Greater Israel, they would not compromise. They want it all for themselves. They ignore the existence of the other. Now, this is a nutshell definition of the fanatical evil, ignoring the existence of the other, or ignoring the essence of the other, or ignoring the respect of the other. I'm a great believer in compromises. Even and this will be my concluding remark, even the controversial issue of the holy places in Jerusalem can be resolved through a pragmatic compromise. Whose holy places? This seems to be irresolvable, unsolvable. But I have my grandmother's wisdom. She was a wise old man, and when I was a little boy, she explained to me in simple words, where is the difference between Jew and Christian? Not between Jew and Muslim, but between Jew and Christian. And she said the following. She said, you see, my boy, the Christians believe that the Messiah have been here once and he will come again one day. We Jews believe that the Messiah is still to come. Over this difference, you cannot imagine, she said, how much hatred and bloodshed and persecution. Why, she said, why can't everybody simply wait and see? If the Messiah comes saying, hello, it's nice to see you again, the Jews will have to apologize to the Christians. If, on the other hand, the Messiah comes saying, how do you do, it's good to meet you, the entire Christian world will have to apologize to the Jews. Until then, said my grandmother, live and let live. And let this line be the bottom line of my presentation. Live and let live. Thank you very much.
A reminder, I think, of what only can be described as the magic of Oz, not only a writer who could move us, but an exceptional orator. Now I'd like to introduce Shai Habet. He's a social change activist and former advisor to Meretz MK Michal Rosen. Our President Reuven Rivlin gave a beautiful eulogy at Amos Oz's funeral, and Shai will read it now in Hebrew, and it will be followed by an English translation as well.
עמוס אהובנו, עמוס היקר. כבר 2 יממות עברו, ואני עדיין לא יודע איך לבחור את המילים. על מי לדבר? על עמוס שלי או על עמוס שלנו? על עמוס החבר לספסל הלימודים בגימנסיה, או עמוס השכן מבן מימון 28? הילד שלא שיחק כדורגל, אבל ישב איתי פעם כשחליתי בשפעת, ובמשך 3 שעות הסביר לי את ההבדל בין ציונות פוליטית לציונות מיסטית. אתם יכולים רק לדמיין איזה כאב ראש חזרתי למיטה. ואולי על עמוס שלנו, עמוס של הקוראים, עמוס של בני דורי, הדור שהתבגר לתוך המדינה, עמוס של האומה. אני חושב, עמוס, שאף פעם לא סיפרתי לך את הסיפור הזה, אבל עכשיו זה ודאי הזמן. יום אחד ישבתי במליאת הכנסת וקראתי את סיפור על אהבה וחושך. אסור לי לומר את זה, אבל קראתי את זה כאילו זה ניתן מסיני. הייתי שקוע בכל שורה ושורה. והנה, מעבר לכתף שלי מציץ יוסי שריד ואומר לי, אתה קורא דוסטויבסקי של העם היהודי. דוסטויבסקי של העם היהודי. תפסתי את יוסי והושבתי אותו לידי, והקראתי לו אט ובסבלנות את הקטע הבא. אחת לכמה שבועות, הייתה חצי ירושלים נאספת בימי שבת, ב-11 בבוקר, לשמוע את נאומיו חוצבי הלהבות של מנחם בגין באספות של תנועת החירות באולם אדיסון בירושלים. סבא היה מתנאה לכבוד העצרת באדיסון, בחליפתו השחורה המהודרת ובעניבת סטן בצבע תכלת. ואני, כך כתב עמוס, חגיגי ומסורק היטב, בחולצה לבנה ובנעליים מצוחצחות. הייתי צועד עם סבי ישר אל השורה השנייה או השלישית באולם. העולם היה מלא תמיד מפה אל פה באוהדי האצ"ל ובמעריציו של מנחם בגין האגדי. כמעט כולם גברים, ובהם אבותיהם ומעריציהם רבים מבני כיתתי מבית הספר תחכומני. אתה מבין, אמרתי ליוסי? אני לא קורא את דוסטויבסקי, אני קורא את עצמי. זה אני שם באותיות הקטנות, אני נמצא שם בספר. כשעמוס כותב על אהבה וחושך, הוא כותב עליי. כי גם אני, עמוס, כמו כל אחד ואחת מהקוראים שלך, הרגשתי לא רק שאתה כותב אליי, אלא שאתה ממש כותב עליי. אבל יוסי שריד זיכרונו לברכה תיקן אותי. הוא כותב עלינו, רובי. הוא כותב על כולנו. מי מאיתנו צדק? כנראה ששנינו. ודווקא בגלל שהכתיבה שלך הייתה אנושית ואוניברסלית לא פחות משהייתה אישית וקרובה, הצלחת לספר את הסיפור שלנו הרחק מעבר לישראל הקטנה שלנו. עמוס יקירי, תמיד אמרת לי שאתה מקנא בי כי אני רקדתי עם הבנות. אבל גם אני קינאתי בך קנאת סופרים. או יותר נכון, קנאתו של מי שאיננו סופר במי שהוא סופר. עיניך הרואות טוב תמיד, הביטו אל העולם ברכות ובחדות גם יחד, בפיקחון, בסקרנות ובחולמנות. אבל טביעת האצבע הכי ייחודית שלך, בכל מה שכתבת, בכל מה שאמרת, הייתה היכולת שלך להתבונן על הדברים עמוק מבפנים, אבל תמיד קצת מבחוץ. אני אף פעם בחיי לא הייתי עם הרוב, אמרת באחד הרעיונות שלך, ואכן היית החירותניק, הרוויזיוניסט בסביבה של מפאיניקים, היית ילד חוץ ירושלמי, עסוק במילים, בקיבוץ שבו התהלכו צעירים שזופים ושריריים, היית איש האבן הירושלמית והדשא של הקיבוץ בערד המדברית. אבל אתה, עמוס, לא רק שלא פחדת להיות מיעוט ודעת מיעוט, אפילו להיקרא בוגד לא פחדת. להפך, ראית במילה הזאת תואר של כבוד. לפני 2 התארחת בחוג תנ"ך בבית הנשיא, והמילים שאמרת אז עדיין חורכות את בשרי. וכך אמרת, עמוס, ואני מצטט: הצצתי בטוקבקים שנוסדו בירושלים לפני 2600 שנה. אלו נגד ירמיהו הנביא, והרגשתי בבית. שאלה מיהו בוגד, מהו בוגד, מעסיקה אותי מאז ימי ילדותי. הרבה פעמים בחיי קראו לי בוגד, וישנה שמועה שאיני היחיד בחדר. הראשונה בחיי הייתה כשהייתי בן 8. הפעם האחרונה, כך אני מקווה, לא אירעה עדיין. ואז עמוס, הוספת והקראת רשימה ארוכה של בוגדים. לינקולן וצ'רצ'יל, תומאס מן ושאר דה גול, הרצל ודוד בן גוריון, בגין וסאדאת, רבין וביאליק. בזכות האומץ הזה ובזכות המבט הכי פנימי והכי חיצוני גם יחד, היית עמוס עבורי ועבור רבים כל כך מדליק פנסי הרחוב של מציאות חיינו כאן. זה שהלב שלו מזהה את שעות הזריחה והשקיעה, והעיניים שלו יודעות להרגיש ממטרים כבדים קרבים, והוא יודע איזה סמטה עומדת להחשיך והיכן מכסה ערפל את הרחוב. בעקביות היית עובר ומדליק כל פנס בכל פינה. מבהיר ומפרק את המתרחש לנגד עינינו, מראה לנו כמה הדברים מורכבים, נותן שם למה שלא ידענו, לתת לו אפילו צורה, מעורר דיון. לפעמים עשית את זה בסובלנות, לפעמים בהתגעשות אדם, אבל תמיד במדויק. גם בזה קינאתי בך, עמוס, ביכולת שלך להכיר את החברה שלנו עד לנקודה העמוקה ביותר שבה, לכעוס עליה עד כאב, ולאהוב אותה תמיד עד אינסוף. ומה נעשה עכשיו, עמוס? עכשיו כשאינך? מי ימשיך ויספר עלינו, אותנו? הדרך לחיות עם המתים, כך נכתב בספרך האחרון ואני מצטט, היא להזמין אותם אלינו לפעמים, לעשות להם כוס קפה, להעלות איתם קצת זיכרונות, לנסות להתפייס איתם קצת ולשלוח אותם בחזרה אל החושך, שיחכו לנו שם בסבלנות, כך כתבת. הלוואי שתבוא כשנזמין אותך, עמוס, תשתה איתנו קפה, תקרא איתנו קריאה צמודה את המציאות, תאהב אותנו, עמוס, עוד קצת, כדי שהלב יוכל לכאוב טיפה פחות כשאתה אינך. ורק שתדע, עמוס, שיותר משרצית אתה לרקוד עם הבנות, רצו הבנות לרקוד איתך. אך הן לא העזו לבקש.
And now to read the English translation, I wanted to invite Amy Goldman, who's the NIF Naomi Chazan Fellow, to read that translation of the eulogy you just heard.
Our beloved Amos, dear Amos, 2 days have passed and I still do not know whom to talk about, my Amos or our Amos. Our Amos. Amos, my friend from the Jerusalem Gymnasia School. Amos, my neighbour from 28 Van Maimon Street, the boy who didn't play soccer. But when I had flu, he came to visit and for 3 hours explained to me the difference between political Zionism and mystical Zionism. You can only imagine the kind of headache I had after that. Or maybe our Amos, Amos of the readers, Amos of my generation that grew up with the state, Amos of the nation. I think, Amos, I never told you this story, but now it must be the time. One day I sat in the Knesset plenum reading A Story of Love and Darkness. I should not say this, but I read it as received from Mount Sinai, and I was deeply absorbed in every line. Over my shoulder, Yossi Sharid said to me, "You read the Dostoevsky of the Jewish people." I grabbed Yossi and sat him next to me and read to him slowly and patiently the following passage. Once every few weeks, half of Jerusalem would gather at 11 a.m. on Saturday morning to hear Menachem Begin's fiery speeches at meetings of the Herut movement at the Edison Hall in Jerusalem. Grandfather would enjoy the gatherings in Edison in his elegant black suit and pale blue satin tie. And I, wrote Amos, with my festive, well-combed hair, white shirt and polished shoes, would walk with my grandfather straight to the second or third row in the hall. The hall was always filled with fans of the Irgun and admirers of the legendary Menachem Begin, almost all of them men, including many fans from my classmates from the Tachkamoni school. You see, I said to Yossi, I do not read Dostoevsky. I read myself. I'm there in the small print. I'm there in the book. Because Amos, I feel that you not only did you write to me, but you really wrote about me. But Yossi Sarid of blessed memory corrected me. He writes about us, Ruby. He writes about us all. Which of us was right? Probably both of us. And precisely because your writing was as human and universal as it was personal and close, you were able to tell our story from far beyond our little Israel. My dear Amos, you always told me that you were jealous of me because I danced with the girls, but I also envied you, the envy of writers, or rather the envy of someone who is not a writer with whom is a writer. Your eyes always saw better, and you looked at the world softly and sharply together, soberly, curiously, and insanely. But your most unique fingerprint in everything you wrote, everything you said, was your ability to look at things from deep inside, and also always a little from the outside. I have never been with the majority in my life, you once said in an interview, and therefore you were a herutnik, the revisionist, surrounded by the panikim. You were a child outside of Jerusalem, busy with words, on a kibbutz where young men were tanned and muscular. You were the stone man in Jerusalem, and the kibbutz grass in the desert of Arad. But you, Amos, not only were you not afraid to be in the minority and have a minority opinion, even to be called a traitor you were not afraid. On the contrary, you saw this word as a title of honor. 2 years ago, you were hosted at the Bible Circle at the President's residence, and the words you said still prove their worth. And so, Amos said, and I quote, I looked at the talkbacks, and they were founded in Jerusalem 2,600 years ago. Those against Yirmiyahu and the prophet, and I felt at home. The question of who is a traitor, what is a traitor, has preoccupied me since my childhood. Many times in my life I was called a traitor, and the rumor says that I'm not the only one in the room. The first time was when I was 8, and the last time, I hope, has not happened yet. Then Amos stops and reads a long list of traitors. Lincoln, Churchill, Thomas Mann, Charles de Gaulle, Herzl, and David Ben-Gurion, Begin and Sadat, Rabin and Bialik. Because of your bravery, your gaze, the most internal and external that there could be, for me and for so many, you lit the streets to show the reality of our lives here. The one whose heart recognizes the hours of sunrise and sunset, and his eyes know how to feel heavy showers approaching, and he knows which alley is going to darken, and where fog covers the street. Consistently, you would shine your flashlight in every corner. Clarify and break down what is happening before our eyes. Show us how complex things are. Give a name to what we did not know to give, and even to arouse discussion. Sometimes you did it patiently, sometimes with boiling blood, but always accurately. Of this I was jealous of you too, Amos, of your ability to know our society to the deepest point of it, to be so angry with it, and to love it forever. What will we do now, Amos, now that you're no longer with us? Who will continue to write about us? In your last book, The Way We Live with the Dead, you wrote, and I quote, is to invite them to us sometimes, to make them a cup of coffee, to bring some memories with them, to try to make peace, and to send them back to the darkness to wait patiently for us. I wish you would come back when we invite you, Amos, to have coffee with us, to read with us a close reading of reality, and Amos, to love us a little more, so that the heart can hurt a little less when you are gone. And I just want you to know, Amos, that just as you wanted to dance with the girls wanted to dance with you, but they did not dare to ask.
Thank you, Amy. Next, it's my pleasure to welcome to the stage Ronnie Khan, AO. Ronnie Khan lived in Israel for 18 years and founded Oz Harvest in 2004. She's also NIF Australia's co-patron. She'll share some thoughts on Amos Oz and read one of his great quotes.
So I went to live in Israel in 1970, and my Michael had just recently come out, as we all heard, and reading it in English was an absolute treat. But when my old pun teacher said, and now what I want you to do is read it in Hebrew, I have to say I didn't love it as much. I think the piece that I'm about to read absolutely embodies everything that Amos stood for. I believe that if one person is watching a huge calamity, let's say a conflagration, a fire, there are always three principal options. Number one, run away as far away and as fast as you can and let those who cannot run burn. Number two, write a very angry letter to the editor of your paper, demanding that the responsible people be removed from office with disgrace. Or, for that matter, launch a demonstration. Or number three, bring a bucket of water and throw it on the fire. And if you don't have a bucket, bring a glass. And if you don't have a glass, use a teaspoon. Everyone has a teaspoon. And yes, I know a teaspoon is little and the fire is huge, but there are millions of us, and each one of us has a teaspoon. Now, I would like to establish the order of the teaspoon. People who share my attitude, not the runaway attitude or the letter attitude, but the teaspoon attitude. I would like them to walk around wearing a little teaspoon on the lapel of their jackets so that we know that we are in the same movement, in the same brotherhood, in the same order, the order of the teaspoon.
Thank you, Ronnie. Oz was a writer who could take you deep into the heart of a character's complex world over many pages and many chapters, but he was also capable of what Ronnie just read, which is a pithy, perfect short bite that's also serves as a call to action. Now I'd like to get ready for a video from Roger Cohen. Roger Cohen is a New York Times columnist and an award-winning journalist and an author. He visited Australia in 2016 for the New Israel Fund when he spoke about his memoir, The Girl from Human Street, Ghosts of Memory in a Jewish Family. And he recorded this video from his home especially for tonight.
Hello, this is Roger Cohen from the New York Times. I would go see Amos Oz at his Tel Aviv apartment. His blue eyes were always twinkling. He always, even amid dark and difficult events, saw the funny side, the bright side of life. He'd usually been up for a long time. He would rise around 5:30 a.m. and always said his best working hours were between then and about 8:30. And he told me how hard he had to work to make sure there wasn't a single discordant note in his novels, in his writings. Anyone who's read My Michael or A Tale of Love and Darkness or any of his other masterpieces knows that he succeeded in that. He was a great writer. To me, he embodied the soul of Israel. He was an Israeli patriot. He liked to tell the story of how his father, back in Lithuania, would see graffiti saying, "Jews, get out, go to Palestine." And nowadays, sometimes he sees graffiti or hears people screaming, Jews get out of Palestine. He felt a Jewish homeland was a necessary thing, a needed thing, and he believed in the Israel framed in 1948, an Israel of tolerance, an Israel of understanding, an Israel that was a Jewish homeland, but at the same time a place where people of every ethnicity, of every creed, of any religion could be treated and would be treated as equal citizens. He believed in that Israel. He believed also that the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza from 1967 onward, the occupation of the West Bank continuing, the encirclement of Gaza continuing, he believed that this had a profoundly corrosive effect on Israeli democracy. To have at the same time Israeli settlers in the West Bank enjoying all the guarantees of the rule of law and of Israeli democracy, and side by side with them, millions of Palestinians living under Israeli oppression and effectively disenfranchised, suffering more or less daily humiliations. That this not only was not reconcilable ultimately with Jewish ethics, but that this was damaging to Israel, took Israel away from itself. And for that reason, he campaigned tirelessly, wrote tirelessly, believed tirelessly in the possibility, remote as it may seem today, of a two-state outcome. He liked to remind me that all compromises are painful, that if this outcome were ever achieved, it would not be with smiles on the faces of Israelis and Palestinians. No, they would be kicked. They would be brought kicking and screaming to this outcome, which nevertheless held the best possibility for the fulfillment of both peoples, neither of whom is going to disappear from the Holy Land. Two peoples living side by side with each other in peace and security. This was Amos Oz's dream, and despite all the difficulties that we see today, and I think the two-state outcome has probably never appeared more remote, despite that, he still believed. In conclusion, I'd like to read from a column I wrote about my friend Amos, so greatly missed. I wrote that in A Tale of Love and Darkness, Amos described walking out early in the morning into the desert near his longtime home in Arad. And he wrote, "Now you can hear the full depths of the desert silence. It isn't the quiet before the storm or the silence of the end of the world, but a silence that only covers another, even deeper silence." And that's how I imagine Amos now, inhaling the biblical silence, a silence that is also an admonition to the shrieking of the cowards who would call themselves leaders.
Now I'd like to introduce Ryan Kaplan. He's also an NIF, Naomi Hazan Fellow, and a clinical psychologist. He's sharing excerpts from a political article by Amos Oz on disagreements.
Democracy is associated with humanism, and humanism is associated with pluralism, i.e. the recognition of the equal right of all men to differ from one another. The differences between people are not a curse, but a blessing. We are different not because some of us have not yet seen the light, but because there are in fact many different lights in the world. Saadia Gaon's famous work is rightly titled Beliefs and Opinions, not Belief and Opinion. There is no Jewish pope, but were one to be elected, we would all slap him on the back and say something like, "You don't know me from Adam, but your grandfather and my uncle once did business together in Zhytomyr or in Marrakesh, so give me a couple of minutes and I'll explain to you once and for all what God really wants from us." Throughout Jewish history, there have been pretenders to the throne, some of whom may even have had a considerable following. But as a rule, the Jewish people does not like to be told what to do. Ask Moses, ask the prophets. God himself complains constantly about how undisciplined and quarrelsome the Israelites are. They argue with Moses, Moses argues with God and even submits his resignation, which he eventually withdraws, but only after he is negotiated with and had his demands met by God. Abraham bargains with God like a used car salesman over the fate of Sodom, 50 righteous men, 40, 30, and he even reproaches the master of the universe with his poignant, "Shall not the judge of all the earth do justly?" Nowhere does the Bible tell us that he was struck by lightning for his blasphemy. The people quarrelled with the prophets quarrelled with God, the kings quarrelled with the people and with the prophets, Job cursed the heavens refused to acknowledge that they had sinned against Job, although they did award him compensation, and in recent generations there have even been Hasidic rabbis who have summoned God to appear before a rabbinical court. Jewish culture is anarchistic at heart. We don't like discipline, and we don't simply obey orders. What we want is justice. A simple shepherd can become king of Israel or compose the Psalms if he is moved by the Holy Spirit. A dresser of sycamore trees can become a prophet. A shepherd of the flocks of Kalba Savua, or a shoemaker or a blacksmith can teach and explain the Torah, leaving a lasting mark on the daily life of each and every Jew. Yet the challenge, who made you a ruler and a judge over us, or how do we know that you are the one, is never or almost never far away. You may be a great scholar, but there is someone of equal stature just around the corner who does not share your opinion, and often both opinions are the word of the living God. Questions of authority have generally been resolved by means of a partial consensus, never unanimously. The history of Jewish culture throughout the ages has been a succession of bitter and often tempestuous disputes, some of which have nonetheless been very fruitful. In the absence of an authoritative mechanism for the resolution of such disputes, the opinion of one rabbi was given greater weight than that of another, simply because the former was considered the greater scholar. Jewish culture at its best is a culture of give and take, of negotiation and thorough examination of all aspects of a given issue, of keen persuasion and arguments for the sake of heaven, but also of strong passions merely masquerading as arguments for the sake of heaven. This spiritual foundation is quite compatible with polyphonic democracy, a choir of different voices, coordinated by a system of authoritative rules. Lights, not the light. Beliefs and opinions, not belief and opinion.
The next video we're about to see is Amos Oz's daughter, Fania Oz-Salzberger. She's a history professor at the University of Haifa. She's published numerous essays and articles, as well as co-authoring the book Jews and Words with her father, Amos Oz. She recorded a message for this evening's tribute to her father, and she also accompanied him in 2011 on the trip to Australia. In the booklet for tonight's event, you can actually read more about her connection with Amos, and both the video and the article were organised by Plus 61J.
Dear friends in Australia, dear members and supporters of the New Israel Fund, I'm here to speak in memory of, and partially humbly on behalf of, my beloved father, Amos Oz. These are still days of great grief for me. In Hebrew we call it Evel Amok. And yet here I am, trying to say a few things to you, because you and what you stand for are so important to me, and were so very important to Amos, my father. He had several great loves in his life: his family, literature, his readers, the Jewish people, the state of Israel, Chekhov, Agnon, Bialik, Zelda, the poet. many small loves in his life, and I would like to assure you that he loved Australia dearly. I had the privilege of bringing him to Australia, not for the first time, he visited before, but he did come along with me, which was absolutely wonderful. And the New Israel Fund, which he supported, cherished, and fought alongside with for years now, for the better future of the State of Israel. The Oz family, my father as its head, and myself and our other family members, have always been on the side of humanist, open-hearted, empathetic Zionism, a humanist, open-hearted, and empathetic Israel, a humanist, open-hearted, and empathetic Jewishness. None of us have ever been religious Jews. My father abandoned faith, I think, very early in his life. And yet, within the mystery of Jewish continuity, within Israel's best chance of surviving and flourishing, as a result of a wonderful habit or set of habits. Reading from a very early age, asking questions, including tough questions, from a very early age. Arguing, disputing, and disagreeing, not always politely, but respectfully, from a very early age. And mothering and fathering, in every possible combination of these words, of a new generation able to carry this human and textual torch. Our hearts are open to every lover of Israel, of Jewishness in this broad definition, and of humanity as such, beyond Israel and beyond Jewish. Every person whose heart is open to talk, to debate, to agree or disagree, to read, to write to us, and most of all, that rarest of capabilities, to listen. My father was not only a writer and a public voice, strong one. He was also a very capable, very talented listener. I am hoping, dear friend, that his words, his message, his hopes and longings, and mine, and ours, the ones we all share together, shall yet continue and flourish for many years to come. Thank you for having read and loved my father, Amos Oz. Thank you for your wise and nuanced support of Israeli culture and society, and of the very best of Jewish legacy, which for me is also the very best of human legacy. Toda rabba, shalom from Israel.
We are almost at the end of our event this evening, and we wanted to really almost close, with another video of Amos Oz. When he was in Australia, he did two big in conversations. The first clip you'll see tonight is with Mark Baker at the Wheeler Centre in Melbourne. And then the last question you'll hear, as well as the last question I posed to Amos Oz at the Graph Oration. He talks in this next clip about his urge to write stories and our urge to read them. And with me, he reflected on diaspora Jews and whether we can be part of the solution to the conflict in Israel and Palestine.
Can I just ask you to, you've written, I think we heard 27 books, and you wrote an article in Arose yesterday, and I know that you've been travelling on a long trip to Australia. What's the magical formula? How have you managed to be so prolific? What does your day look like that has allowed you to really create the most incredible body of literature that cuts across all genres?
Well, I have 2 pens on my desk in Arad. I don't write with a computer, I write with a pen in long hand. I have 2 pens, one black and one blue. When I have the urge to tell a story, I use one pen. and I tell a story. I don't tell a story in order to tell people what to do or what to believe in. I tell a story because I believe it is a primeval urge in all of us, not just in the writers, to tell stories and to hear stories. Ever since we were very little children, we need to tell stories and we need to hear stories. This is like the need to dream. It's an urge. The other pen is to tell the government to go to hell. And I've been writing the same article more or less 500 times over those years, telling the government, many different governments, again and again and again, dear government, please go to hell. They read my articles and for some reasons they don't go to hell, but I don't tire of telling them to go there. Maybe one day they will.
Question just to close with, as you're in a room in Australia, can Jews in the diaspora be part of a solution to the conflict between Israel and Palestine?
Every Jew is entitled to an opinion, and in my view, every Jew is entitled to more than one opinion. Diaspora Jews are entitled to criticize Israel, to give Israel advice, to give Israel ideas, to give Israel tips, to give Israel aids. Israel is not obliged to accept those aids. But we would listen, just as we hope that diaspora Jews will listen to us, Israeli Jews, when we review and sometimes criticize diaspora Jewish existence. There should be an intensive cousinship between the diaspora and Israel. Intensive cousinship by which I mean we don't always have to agree on everything. It's unnatural for two Jews to agree on anything at all. It's actually unnatural for one Jew to agree with himself or herself, because everybody has a divided mind and soul. But let's talk, let's keep the conversation between Israel and the diaspora open and vivid and alive. Thank you very much. Thank you, Michaela. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Shira Berger. I'm the program manager at NIF Australia. When we first started putting this evening together, there was so much we wanted to include. Amos Oz was such a prolific author. How could we do justice to his extensive works? In addition, he had so much to say about the world and his beloved Israel. While tonight has touched on just a few of his insights, I hope it has left you with a greater understanding of who Amos was, both as an author and as one of the leading intellectuals of our time. He never stopped fighting for and believing in a just and inclusive Israel. He was a proud supporter of NIF and stood up for the work that our grantees do, even when it wasn't popular. He was a man of principle to his core, and while his voice and his pen will be missed, his messages will continue to inspire us all. The amazing contributions tonight by all our speakers and musicians has enriched us all and helped us fill a little of the hole created by his passing. In particular, I wanted to thank Michaela Kalowski for helping bring together the many different elements that made up this evening. And as an expression of thanks to our speakers tonight, we have a small gift, so please don't leave. Thank you all for coming. We hope to see you again at future NIF events. We are proud that our work continues Amos Oz's legacy for a just and democratic Israel. And we have a special thank you to Nadav and Jesse, who are going to conclude the evening with an inspiring old favorite about changing the world, Ani Vata.
אני ואתה משנה את העולם. אני ואתה, אז יבוא כבר כולם. אמרו את זה קודם, לפניי, זה לא משנה. אני ואתה נשנה את העולם. אני ואתה ננסה מההתחלה. יהיה לנו רע, אין דבר, זה לא נורא. אמרו את זה קודם, לפניי, זה לא משנה. אני ואתה נשנה את העולם. אני ואתה נשנה את העולם. אני ואתה, אז יבואו כבר כולם. אמרו את זה קודם לפניי, זה לא משנה. אני ואתה נשנה את העולם. יאללה ליי, די 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 די. יאללה ליי, די 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 די. אמרו את זה קודם לפניי, זה לא משנה. אני ואתה נשנה את העולם.
You and I will change the world. Start with you and I, and the world will follow on. It's been said before us, never mind, we'll say it again. You and I will change the world together.
אני ואתה נשנה את העולם. אני ואתה, אז יבואו כבר כולם. אמרו את זה קודם לפניי, זה לא משנה. אני ואתה נשנה את העולם. אני ואתה נשנה את העולם. אני ואתה, אז יבואו כבר כולם. אמרו את זה קודם לפניי, זה לא משנה. אני ואתה נשנה את העולם.